Hello everybody, and thank you for coming out in all this rain. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my son Derek. Most people wait their whole lives to meet their heroes, but I gave birth to mine. Let me take a minute to introduce myself. I am Renee Myers. I'm the proud mother of an exceptional young man, in my own unbiased opinion, an exceptional young man by the name of Sergeant Derek Miller. Some people call him friend, some call him father. Some even call him soldier, but it's my privilege to call him son. I'm going to give you a glimpse into the journey that's brought me here to talk to you today. I'm going to shed some light on exactly why it's so important for good people like you to care about what happens to men like my son and the many others who answer the call to defend our country. So I'm going to take it back to a certain autumn afternoon back in 2006. I get a call from Derek, and he lets me know that after a lot of thought and consideration, he has decided to enlist in the Army National Guard. Now, a lot of mixed emotions came over me that day because no mother wants to hear that their only child has decided to enlist in the Army, in the infantry division no less, in a time of active war. And it's just not something that a mother wants to hear. But my son was so convinced and just solid in his convictions to enlist that part of me couldn't help but be proud of him for his dedication to this country that he loves and his commitment to provide the best possible life he could for his family. And another thing I learned a long time about Derek is once he sets his mind to accomplish something, he's unstoppable. There's no getting in his way when he sets his mind to something. And I also learned a long time ago that as much as we love our children, we only get to hold them for a very little while. And then we have to let them go and walk the path that God has for them. So I said a little prayer of protection over my only child. And I watched him walk into the teeth of the war machine and prayed that he would come back to me and all of us who love him so well in one piece. Now Derek dove into his training with all of the enthusiasm and the dedication and gusto that he does with everything that he truly believes in. And he was quickly promoted to sergeant. And then he not only willingly deployed with his unit when it was called up, but he then volunteered to deploy 2 more times to Afghanistan. Now this cost him precious time with his 2 daughters who were very, very young at the time, and his wife, who he hadn't been married to for very long. But he did it so he could defend the country that he loves so well. And he used to talk to me at length about how he was so excited to make a career in the Army. He was excited to finish his time in the Guard so that he could then enlist in the regular Army and then continue to serve the country and defend his loved ones. On his 3rd deployment, not 2 weeks after he had been promoted to sergeant, his life was to change forever because of a selfless act of courage. Now, Derek's story actually begins the day before the incident that landed him in Leavenworth. In a very heavily contested hot combat zone in the dangerous region of Afghanistan, Derek's unit was assigned to provide security for a very heavily traveled road. Derek was in charge of a security checkpoint that was responsible for inspecting all the weapons and personnel and vehicles that came through that day. There was intelligence in the area that some Afghan National Army weapons and uniforms had been captured by insurgents, so Derek's unit was on the lookout for anybody coming through who might have that contraband. A truck loaded full of armed men drove up that day, and nothing about them seemed right. They were wearing ill-fitting uniforms, and on the floor of the vehicle, there were bags of Afghan-style civilian clothing. Now, Derek had learned from his previous deployment in Iraq that was a tactic that the enemy used. They would launch their attack, and then they would throw these civilian clothes over their uniforms and just vanish into the population. It was very difficult to find them once they did that. So that was the first thing that was the red flag. Then they had IDs that looked like they had been tampered with. Now, Derek had a lot of experience examining credentials and IDs because that's what he did in his civilian role as a security officer at Fort Detrick, Maryland. He worked one of the main gates, and that was his responsibility, to check those IDs and make sure that everything was in order. Most disturbing to him of all of this, though, was the presence of quite a few empty 55-gallon drums. Now, you might say, why would that be disturbing? But in his previous deployment in Iraq, he became intimately familiar with the tactics that his enemies would use. And one of them was making IEDs, which were roadside bombs. Now, he knew that the chemicals that they mixed to deploy these IEDs were mixed in those empty 55-gallon drums. And these were the same bombs that they used to blow up his brothers in arms, and he had seen and lost so many friends and comrades in that way. As Derek was conducting his inspection of the vehicle and the passengers, one of the men under his command was doing a thorough pat-down, physical pat-down of the driver. And with all of these red flags raised, Derek went to his commanding officer and asked for permission to detain the vehicle. Now, they had instructions from above, they had orders from above, from people who were not in the field, had no idea what the conditions were, that if the serial numbers on their IDs matched the serial numbers on the weapons, they had to let that vehicle pass. So despite his reservations, Derek followed his orders. He let that vehicle go and watched it veer off directly into the direction of the fighting, where most of the people were fleeing the battle at the time. So then we fast forward to the next day. And after grueling, horrifying conditions for hours and hours, they finally decided to set up camp at an abandoned school. Now, this school was surrounded on all sides by hostile villages. It's a hotly contested area. And since they had been on high security alert for so long, once they established their perimeter, they were told to stand down, half chow. One of the men under Derek's command pointed out a suspicious individual inside the perimeter. It was the same man that was driving the vehicle the day before. And he knew that because this was the same soldier that had patted down that driver. There was no doubt about who this man was. During the course of the questioning, Derek told the guy, why are you here? If I asked him why he was here, he told him first that he was there to fix an electrical line. Derek points out, you have no tools. Why are you here? You can't fix anything without any tools. Then he was there to fix the water pipe. Still no tools. So Derek tells him through the interpreter, you're in a secure area, you've got to leave right now. When that guy walks away, Derek is thinking to himself, this is just not right. I needed to question him more closely. He went to his commanding officer, got permission to question the man again, got the interpreter, got another soldier to provide overwatch. You don't do this when you plan to murder someone. You don't take witnesses with you. Derek questioned that man again. The man's name was Atta Mohammed. Name was not allowed to be spoken at the trial, but that's who he was. This man that Derek questioned during the second round got agitated because he knew he had been found out. He reached for Derek's gun. Derek had to fire or be killed. He did that to protect himself and the other people that were with him. Not 45 minutes after this incident happened, they were subjected to an attack, complex, multi-directional attack, directed at all of the positions where all of his brothers in arms, their munitions and everything were previously located. This man, Atta Muhammad, and his two combat-age companions had been walking the perimeter and giving intelligence to the enemy. Because Derek's gun went off, none of those men were in the positions that they were reported in, and so there was no loss of life that day. 14 people showed up at his trial to testify to the fact that his actions saved their life. The Army would only allow 4 of them to testify. In spite of all of that, Derek sits in Leavenworth right now on a life sentence. My son, a man who never had a single run-in with the law, no previous history of violence, and a sterling service record, was convicted of life convicted of premeditated murder, sent away for life without a shred of corroborating evidence, no crime scene investigation, no forensic evidence, no evidence collected of any kind. I see articles all the time, men in prison 10, 15, 20 years for things that they did not commit, crimes that they did not commit. New technology comes to bear. That evidence is re-examined. These men are released, given a second chance to have their lives back. That's never going to happen for my son, because none of that evidence was either collected or it was destroyed. So that day's never going to come for him unless people like you, we have power. Unless people stand up and say no more to a system that will allow hearsay evidence to be presented, to rely on the testimony of witnesses who've changed their testimony, one of whom, in my son's case, admitted to lying in his previous statements. One of the witnesses against my son was offered money and a U.S. visa. He's living here amongst us right now, my son, sitting in Leavenworth. We continue to release the worst of the worst to come to and fight against us again and again. And my son, who wants nothing more than to come home to his family, raise his daughters, and be a contributing member of society, sits in Leavenworth right now. This is not good enough for the men and women who answer the call to serve our country. The same freedoms that you and I can expect when we walk into a courtroom to be tried by a jury of our peers. Only 2 of the 10 people that made the decision to send my son away had ever seen a day of combat. To be presumed innocent until proven guilty. My son was taken through the airport in chains like a criminal before he was ever even charged with a crime. We have to keep fighting for these men. And they are the ones who make the tough decisions. They're the ones who put themselves in harm's way for us. And I, for one, will continue to fight for my son, my hero, Derek Miller. Thank you very much.
God bless.